Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'd like to start us off together in gratitude for the land that we live on. Myself and our speakers today are joining from Mohkinstsis, the place where the Elbow and Bow River meet, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Ganai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Iarhe Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation, Region Number 3, and all the people who make their home in the Treaty Region of Southern Alberta. In reflection on what this land means to me, I think of gratitude, opportunity, and responsibility. Gratitude for the opportunities this land has given me and continues to provide, and for the opportunities my parents who immigrated here had to pursue a better life. And in that, I acknowledge that the experience and reality for the original stewards of this land was drastically different and radically unjust. And so this land also means responsibility, to learn about the diverse history and cultures of the original peoples of this land, and my role in supporting and taking action towards an equitable future. So welcome from wherever you're joining us today, and I invite you to reflect on the land that you live on, what it means to you, and the action steps that you can take in your spheres of influence in your truth and reconciliation journeys. This webinar today is focused on topics that will help nonprofit professionals and the organizations they work with build their capacity and strengthen their impact. Thank you to our supporters, the Muttart Foundation, the Calgary Foundation, the Suncor Energy Foundation, and the Alberta government. For this webinar on the art of navigating difficult workplace conversations, I am thrilled to introduce our speakers, Ken Cameron and Russell Stratton. Ken and Russell have together created the Forum Theatre for Business series to help organizations give their employees the tools they need to co-create a respectful workplace culture and empower individuals to challenge disrespectful behavior. Russell has achieved international success as a result of his proven track record over the past 30 years. He has extensive experience in HR and operations management in a wide range of organizational cultures, including small, medium, and large enterprise, which covers a variety of industries, such as construction, engineering, manufacturing, hospitality, law enforcement, and local and national governments, and of course, nonprofits. Ken is a certified LEGO Serious Play facilitator and is the co-creator of several facilitation workshops, including The Future is Coming, the Shift Facilitation Card Deck, and Culture Shift Method. His work has been recognized with a Facilitation Impact Award, Platinum Award, by the International Association of Facilitators, and Organization of the Year Award by the International Association of Public Participation for the Cultural Transformation Project for the City of Calgary. So today's webinar will be recorded and available for viewing afterwards. And I would really like to thank you, Ken and Russell, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here, and Russell's gonna kick us off by giving us a little bit of an agenda and telling us what our learning objectives are. So Russell, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So thanks for joining, everybody. Just an idea about what you're getting for the next 60 minutes. As you can see for our subtitle there, we're considering why leaders often avoid difficult conversations and how you can use the BEEF model, which we'll explain later in our webinar, as a technique for structuring those conversations so you can be even better. And I'm sure that everybody in this room has faced difficult workplace conversations at times, whether it's with co-workers, whether it's with employees, suppliers, customers, perhaps even your boss. And what we're looking to do is how to make it easier for you so you feel more confident and you're going to have a better outcome. What we're going to specifically cover, Ken, if you could just forward on to the next slide, that'd be great. So specifically, focusing in why leaders don't have difficult conversations and also the implications of not doing it. The importance of taking early proactive management action. So why do we want to address these issues as they come up and not let them fester? As you mentioned earlier, focusing on the BEEF model as a format for the conversation itself, and using the appropriate language to gain buy-in and agreement for change, because all this is about is looking to help somebody move back to that acceptable level of performance, attendance or behaviour, so they can be a fully effective member of your team if they're an employee, or a co-worker, or more effective boss if it happens to be the person that you work for. Okay, so that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. We would invite, if you have any specific questions that you've come with today, that you say, I definitely need to have this answered in the 60 minutes, you do have the chat box facility available in front of you, so feel free to type any of those questions in there. Ken and I will take a look and do our level best to answer them during the course of our webinar today, either during the webinar or in a short sort of Q&A session that we have at the end. While you're doing that, I'll just explain who we are. Thank you to Mary for the introductions. What you see on the slide here are just a range of the companies that Ken and I have worked with over the last few years. And as you can see, it's picked up some of our engineering clients, some of the folks that we've worked with in the construction industry and also in the public sector. So this is what we're talking to you guys about is a tried and tested approach that we've used over the last, 7 or 8 years now, I think, Ken, specifically here in Calgary and Western Canada, with a number of organisations. And you are the latest in a long line of participants who've had the opportunity to share this and hopefully take it back to your workplace and put it into practice.
I think, Russell, that we might be verging on 10 years. It's hard to tell because of the black hole that was the pandemic. I feel like that was like a single year that, like, it feels like 1 year, but it was really like 2.5. So it's hard to tell now how long we've been doing it. But I think we're approaching our 10th anniversary.
It could,
and Russell,
well
also, could be. And Russell, I've jumped in. We invited everyone to put their comments into chat, and I was supposed to be monitoring the chat box, but it's come to, I've realized that because I'm also driving the PowerPoint slides that I cannot see the chat box. So you're going to have to be the chat man for the remainder of this webinar, and I'm going to be slide man.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm happy with that deal. So I have the chat open in front of me, so as and when anything does pop in, I can take a look at it. So feel free, if you have questions as we go, to put those in to the chat box, and we can pick up on that. So I think if we can move on, that'll be good. So I had a first question for everybody. Okay, why don't leaders have difficult workplace conversations? What stops them from doing this? So I am going to invite everybody to take part here. It's not just a one-way from Ken and I. It is some participation from yourselves. And throw your answers into the meeting chat. And thank you to Juliet, who has kicked us off. So I'll just allow a moment for people to put some of their answers in, and then I'll pick out some of the responses.
And lo and behold, Russell, miracle of miracles, I figured out a way to do both run the slides and look at the chat at the same time. So I can pick up my responsibilities as I was supposed to. So these are some of the things that we're seeing pop into the chat box, Russell. It's we see that people say it's uncomfortable. They have a fear of confrontation. They don't know how to have these conversations. The conversations are easier to avoid. Some people are scared of the reaction, or they don't want to upset someone. Or they don't want to lose the employee. Perhaps they're afraid that if they have the conversation, then the person will just out and out quit, which in the face of these terms of the great resignation or quiet quitting might be very real concerns from their point of view. There's fear of the outcome, which might be related to them quitting or anger or reactions. There's also another one here around time restrictions / priorities, also about being unprepared. I see they don't even know where to start the conversation, lack of confidence, not knowing how to approach it, not knowing what to say. And then also, here's another one, the context and details are not always clear to people. So that's my random selection, Russell, of some of the things that I've seen in the chat box.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you, Ken, and thank you to everybody for the audience participation. There's going to be another couple of opportunities for you to do something similar so you can get those typing fingers ready. And what you've come up with here is not uncommon. This is very similar. We ask a very similar question at the beginning of all our workshops, online or face-to-face, and this is 90% similar to what other people are saying. So if this is one of your concerns, it is not unusual. So what we're looking to do with our work is how to make this easier for you. How can we give you a structure that you can use? How can we give you the opportunity, certainly on our face-to-face workshops, when we actually can try this? Here today, you're going to actually watch it done by two of our actors and see how they tackle the situation, what they could do better, and you can see it done poorly and also done even better. But to go, you can walk away with something practical that you can use. So if you've got a conversation tomorrow, you're not there with, what I say, a blank sheet of paper, not sure what to say, nervous about it, and I tell you what, let's put it off until next week, and then we never have the conversation at all. What I'd like to consider with this is, why do we need to have the conversation? Because all the things you've said are totally relevant, and why we would not. But what are the implications if we don't? So if we can just have that next slide up, Ken, that will be great. And what I want to think about here just for a moment is, we can look at this as having implications at three levels. So if let's take an example, we have a team member that's working with us, and perhaps their performance is not up to the level that we would expect. Okay, so there's been situations where work's not been done on time, or not been done to the standard that's required. Perhaps there's been complaints from sponsors or from clients about reports or work they were expecting to receive that they didn't get, or meetings were missed, and whatever it might be. And we think we need to deal with it, but for the reasons that you've said, the problem doesn't get addressed, and it's allowed to fester and continue. So if we don't deal with it and we don't address the issue, then we have some implications at these three levels. So there's the implication for you as a leader in your organization, and your team will probably also be aware that something's not right. They may not know all the details, they may not know all the backgrounds, but they will be aware that work hasn't been done and hasn't been done to the standard that's expected. So if you as the leader aren't addressing the issue, then in their eyes, there's part of your role that you're falling down in. And one of the things I've found in working over the last 30 years with leaders across 2 continents now is that people are expecting their leader to address issues that come up in the team. They're not expecting to be given an easy time. They do want people to address problems when they arise and look to resolve them. So if that's not happening, then that's a question mark in their mind as to the level of effectiveness you have. So there's an implication for you personally. There's also an implication for the team, because if poor performance, poor attendance, poor behaviour, the example I gave or others that we could think about are just allowed to continue, then the challenge is that others look at that and say, well, if person A is allowed to underperform, if person A is allowed to turn up for work late, without a good reason, if person A is allowed to behave in the way they do, where perhaps they're rude or offensive to others, then why don't the rest of us do it? And what we can find is that the culture that we start to establish in our team is not the one that we actually want, but by default it sort of slacks off and people do as they see fit. And perhaps more seriously, people who do want to do a good job and do want to do the right behaviours and do want to be there and give a fine contribution, tend to decide that they start looking around and wanting to go somewhere else, because they find that the implication for the team is this is never addressed, and so why should I be putting the effort in when others don't? And finally, and most of the time when we talk about this on our workshops like we are today, most people see those first two. Yeah, that's pretty obvious for us. I get this. The implications for us, the implications for our team, and by extension our business, but also consider the implications for the individual themselves. This is the person who perhaps performance is not to the level that you would expect. What's the implication for them if we don't say anything? Now, we talked earlier and we saw in our chat box, people are worried about the reactions. Does it make it worse? What's the outcome going to be? But think about it from the individual's perspective. What about if a situation that you found yourself in, there was an aspect of your work that you weren't particularly good at? You may be aware of it, you may not, but it's something you're not achieving the level that you will be expected of you. Your co-workers know this, your manager knows this, but none of them want to tell you, because they're worried about your reaction, or they don't want to upset you, or, it's just they just feel awkward about it. What's worse, having the conversation that may be challenging, or leaving the person to sort of, onto their own devices. Everybody else knows that they're not particularly good at this particular piece of work, but nobody's prepared to tell them. And if you think about that, I would surely think that most people, and most of us on this call today, would rather that somebody took us to one side and had a respectful conversation pointing out where we could improve, rather than just let us fail because they weren't sure what to say. I know I certainly would, and I'm sure others would as well. So when we're thinking about the implications, don't forget the implications it has for the individual. They need to be given the opportunity to improve, and if we don't start the conversation somewhere using the tools that we're going to talk about today, then we run the risk that we just leave them underperforming. So if I could just fall on to that next slide, and that's the last bit from me for a moment. If we can just get to the next slide, Ken. Okay, so one of the things that we're looking about in here is perhaps what we're summarizing with is this context about early proactive action. So the first thing in terms of we can see our magnifying glass is looking at identifying that the problem exists. So as soon as we identify that there's a problem, and again, this could be about performance, it could be about attendance, it could be about behavior. Once we've identified there's a problem, we've got a decision to make. We can either live with it or we can fix it. And if I decide to live with it, it's a conscious decision. We're not going to take action because we think it's better to keep things as they are. Okay? That's a legitimate approach to take. Not we're not going to take action because we're not sure what to say or we're a bit nervous. But most of the time we're going to want to fix it. So then what we're looking at, if we can just have that final image up there, Ken, is how can we fix it? And that's what we're looking at to do today, to give you the tools that you can build your conversation around. So you say, okay, that's the approach that we're going to take so that we can actually look to address the problem. Because I'm sure that the majority of people on this call will realize that we're better to deal with a problem when it's this big than wait until it's this big. And I certainly saw on our list there were some of our HR practitioners here as well, and I'm sure you would prefer that managers dealt with it when it was this big until they come to you with a big problem that's been left to fester for a long time and never been addressed. I've yet to come across something where an issue as my time as an operational manager, as a consultant, or also as an HR manager, when people say, oh yes, it was a really good idea for us to leave this for several months till it got worse. They always tend to say, I wish we'd dealt with this earlier, and that's what we're looking to do today. So Ken, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Russell. One of the things that we wanted to do was share with you, as Russell said, a video in which we have two of our actors who are acting out a scenario so you can see it in action. So first of all, let me describe the scenario for you. So we've got two characters here, Marilyn and Skylar. Marilyn is the supervisor or manager or leader. And Marilyn had asked Skylar to move on to a different team as part of a secondment to cover for a colleague who was off on sick leave, because there's been a hiring freeze, so bringing in extra resources wasn't an option. I'm sure we've all probably throughout the pandemic have experienced those kinds of situations where people need to take time off and other people need cover and there isn't room or opportunity to hire to backfill those positions. Now, in this scenario, Skylar had initially seemed reluctant to change roles, but he seemed to accept the move. Marilyn, though, has recently become aware that things are not working out as she'd hoped with Skylar and his new team, and she spoke to him briefly before she left to a business trip to Vancouver to just check out if there was a problem, make sure everything was fitting in. However, when Marilyn returned, she was aware that things aren't turning out as they should be. She's discovered that deadlines have been missed while she was away. Project records are not being kept up to date, meaning that project deliverables can't be tracked. And a report that was needed for a recent management meeting, which was held in her absence, had not been completed, and that meant a degree of embarrassment for the team. Skylar's supervisor, who we describe as a peer supervisor, so someone who supervises the work but isn't hired as a line manager. So Edward, this other individual, had mentioned that Skylar has been complaining to his coworkers about having to switch roles. And it's been noted that Skylar has been spending time on his old project work to the detriment of this work that he was supposed to be doing. So that's the scenario. That's the background of the scenario that we're going to be sharing with you on video. And while you're listening to this video, we would like you to listen for a couple of things about while she's speaking, while Marilyn is speaking to Skylar. So, Russell, why don't you walk us through this little piece here, the use of language.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So one of the things that we would like you to be looking out for when you're watching and listening to the first round of the conversation between Marilyn and Skylar is she using that challenging language, or is it simply criticizing language? So when we're looking at our work about how we need to use our beef model that we'll talk about later on, but how the type of language that we use when we have the conversation with somebody, we very much want to be on that left-hand side of the slide as you look at it, in the challenging area. We don't want to be simply just going into the red and the criticizing. So if I just give you a quick sort of run through of this, of the difference between the two. So if we're challenging somebody about their behavior, about their performance, about their attendance, we're focused on fact. What happened? Yeah. So, if a deadline was missed, we can give a date when it was missed, when it was due, and when it was finally handed in. That can be factual, rather than judgmental, which is simply, I think you don't get work in on time. And so somebody's able to come back and say, well, when? And you don't have that information to hand. Okay, so it's purely seen to be purely a judgment, rather than it being based on any fact. Second point we were thinking about, and this is always a challenge, because people tend to take can take any form of even constructive criticism personally, is that we want to focus on the problem as much as possible and not simply talk about the person. So in this situation, we don't want Marilyn to be talking about Skylar as, you're the reason why there's an issue, when we could be looking at the problem that's been created. The problem is that the work wasn't handed in on time. The problem was that these deadlines have been missed. That's what we were focusing on, and less on, actually, you're a pretty nasty individual and we wish you weren't here. Thirdly, backlinking into fact, we want to be specific rather than general. So the more specific we can be with somebody, with the detail, rather than the general concept. If somebody was persistently late, these were the days that you were late and these are the times that you came in. Rather than, I noticed you're late a lot. Yeah. Again, what we found over the years is the more specific you can be with people, the more difficult it is for them to sort of wriggle away from it and say it isn't right. And also, we're dealing again with facts and not just on some judgment call that we're making. Remember that we're looking to get somebody to change their behavior. The whole reason for having this conversation is to change behavior. We want to get somebody back up to that acceptable level of performance, behavior, or attendance. It's not simply to blame them. Your boss has got annoyed and come and shouted at you, and you need to look around for somebody to go and shout at. If that's what you're doing, okay, just be honest that that's what you're doing. I wouldn't suggest it's the best method, but that's what you decided to do. You're not having a performance improvement conversation with somebody. You're just giving them an angry blast. And finally, we need to make sure that, remember, we still need to be working with this person after the conversation. And quite often, if they've taken on board what we've said, we're going to be working with them to see how we can improve things. So the relationship needs to continue. We don't want so much division that, they're immediately resigning. Now, that doesn't mean we want to soft soap things and we don't want to address the issues, but we need to bear in mind that we're going to have to work with this person going forward. Because we're not in a situation, in the examples we're talking about today, where we're firing somebody. This is about trying to avoid that, trying to look at there's something good about the person and their work that we want to keep. So bear that in mind when you're listening to and watching this scenario. Which type of language do you see Marilyn using? And what are you noticing from the conversation?
Thanks, Russell. So we're going to divide our video into two parts. And in the first part, we're going to see Marilyn really struggling with this conversation. And I'd like you to think about let's think about 3 ways in which she's struggling. Maybe around these language issues, maybe around other things. And then we'll call a timeout and we'll debrief as a group. And then we'll resume the video and we'll see how Marilyn gets herself out of trouble. So with that in mind, let me just kind of kick off the video, and here we go. It lasts about 4 minutes.
Skylar, I wanted to have a little chat with you. We're just doing a little bit of follow-up on, you know how we had that Zoom meeting earlier about setting up some clear expectations about working from home and what that would be like, right? Do you remember that? So yeah, I just thought I would follow up with you. Are you experiencing any particular challenges that?
Oh, I know Edward's just, how do I put it? He communicates a lot.
Right, he can be a bit chatty.
Yeah. Now, since I'm not at the desk across from him, I thought that would be less, but he finds his ways.
How much do you find that's interfering with your workflow?
Yeah, it's tough. It just seems to have bad time, when I just sort of start getting into it, and then I get a message or a Zoom call or whatever.
Is there anything else going on for you right now?
No, it's just trying to get the job done, as you say.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to sort of bring up a couple of things that I wanted your input on, basically. So seems like there's been a few things happening, and I'd like you to have a chance to address it. So, for one thing, it looks like you've been sort of missing some of our Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. No, I just didn't. I don't know. I think as long as since they're just sort of mostly pretty light catch-up meetings, I thought that it's okay to just be there.
Okay, I understand how it can seem light. Like we have our little morning coffee meetings. They're generally pretty short, just to see where people are on track during the day. So I understand it can seem light, but it really is a way for us to sort of check in and see where people are for the day and what they're working on, and if anyone's having any challenges. So it's really important that just for those 15 minutes, if you can just give us your full attention and focus and let us know you're there, it really helps us all be in alignment. Do you think that's something you can commit to?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Great. All right. Okay. Now, I know there was also a report that didn't get made. Do you remember that?
Uh-huh.
PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Edward.
Yeah. Do you have something to share with me about that? It didn't go.
Unlike some people in our group, I don't like to be the snitch, but you've directly asked me. So what do I say? Edward, he's complaining to me that I didn't get something to him when I got something to him. Okay, I got slides to him for the presentation, and it's not my fault that he doesn't actually know. Well, I mean, he's really good at doing the little working along, but he doesn't really know the details of stuff. So, if it was me and you give me those slides, I just read off, the information, and I know the interpretation. I make it happen. That's sort of the complaining. That's kind of the point, is that you were supposed to put information on the slides, and as I understand it, this is what I'm saying. There were just titles on the slides. There was no actual. There's enough there to go. It's supposed to be the project. He's supposed to know what's going on with the project. Well, but the bullet points to go with what I gave him. With what I. Now it's me. Maybe you should be looking at. Should you be looking at Edward? Maybe. Maybe.
Can you just time out? I'm a little. I don't know where to go from here. He's a little bit aggressive.
Thank you, everyone. So just seeing some thoughts, we'll give you a few moments to type your thoughts into the chat box. What did you see that Marilyn could have done better? What did you see that Marilyn was trying to use around language, and how did that, and what impact did that have on Skylar? All right, so I'm seeing a couple of things coming into the chat box. I'm seeing that she's not being specific. I've seen that a couple of times. Christy mentioned that she's using specific examples, but she could be clearer about the fact that there are concerns. So she's not being she's not being specific enough. Although she is being specific about some of the details, she's not being specific about what the issue is. I see that she's asking too many open-ended questions. She's also interrupting a lot and not giving Skylar the space to speak. She's also, Jillian has mentioned, although she's being specific around the issues, she's not being specific about the way it's impacted the team and the projects, which was something that Russell mentioned earlier. Roxanne has mentioned she's not very prepared and that she's all over the place. Gail has said she needs to be clear about what the expectations were, how they were not met. Marianne has pointed out that she didn't let him finish. She didn't hear him out before she responded. Stephanie's also mentioned that there could have been some pre-work before this scene that we've seen. She could have set up expectations for the meeting up front and having a bit of an agenda up front so that both parties enter the issue prepared. And then Marilyn could have started with the biggest issues first. So lots of questions about her, about vagueness, about not being specific, about being too passive, taking too long to get to the point, a lot of tiptoeing around the issues. So those are a lot of the very comments that we've had, Russell. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I don't think at this stage, because I think people have pulled out some of the key issues, and particularly around the lack of preparation. So perhaps that's something we can have a look at, how we can help people get prepared.
Excellent. Why don't you take us forward with that? I'll set up the next slide for you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have teased you about we will have the beef model. So this is what the beef model is all about. I've used this with leaders, as I say, across 2 continents now for probably 20 of those 30 years that I've been working with leadership development, and certainly in the sort of 9 to 10 years now that Ken and I have been working together, including the COVID years, as we like to call it. Yeah. And what I found that people have found this to be a useful way that is easy to understand, that they can use to plan out what they want to say during the course of the conversation, and making sure that they hit each of those points during the conversation. They can obviously ask questions, they can listen to what the individual has to say, but they know they've got a framework to come back to. So what we encourage people to do before getting into the meeting, when they decide, why am I having the meeting, what's the outcome that I want from it, is then to come down and to consider these beef state questions so that they can put some bullet points under each heading to give them a framework. So for example, the behavior, what happened? So what did the individual do or not do that's causing a problem? Again, we've talked about that, about being specific and being able to give a clarity in our mind as to what the problem is, and also which is the most important problem. As one of our colleagues mentioned in the chat box, Ken, they felt that Marilyn wasn't really clear as to which issue she was going to be focusing on. So you can be laser focused. There might be 3 or 4 things. Which is the most important? Let's deal with that one first, okay? Then go in that order. Being specific. So our example, looking to have 2 or 3 examples where we can illustrate the point to someone. The more specific we can be, the better. The more vague we are, the less clear it is for somebody to understand what we want, but also the easier it is for them to wriggle off the hook, so to speak, and to go and come up with excuses. Now, the key piece to this model, which I think really is the secret sauce that makes it work, is the effect. It's being able to articulate to somebody what impact their behaviour or non-behaviour has had on the team and what caused the problem. Okay, so why this is important is because often people don't see the importance or the relevance of necessarily of what they're doing and seeing how it plays out outside of their own job role. And when it starts to impact other people, what problems that can cause. So if I don't meet a deadline, well, it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect me, or I can do it tomorrow. But if you're leading that report before you can go to the meeting in this afternoon, it impacts you and it impacts the wider team. It also plays into the part that for most people want to be able to sort of get on with their co-workers in a convivial atmosphere. So if they feel they're letting other people down, that becomes more of an issue for them, and they're more likely to take it on board. And then finally, we don't want to leave the conversation until we've actually talked about the future, what can change, and what would be the next steps. And this is one of the areas often I feel that people leave out because they're so glad to have got through. I've explained what's gone wrong. I've given them examples. I've talked about the impact or the effect. The person seems to be in agreement. Or they didn't sort of get angry with me, or they didn't get upset. It wasn't as bad as I thought. Thankfully, I can get out of the interview alive. And guess what? They haven't followed up with what the next steps are so that you can review and monitor going forward. So hopefully that's clear to people. What I'll do is just give an example of where I'd use this in terms of being able to get the point across. So we had a situation. I had the delight at one point in my career of managing a call centre. So if anybody's ever worked in a call centre, they've certainly probably had the joy of sitting on hold for a call centre. It's like a sort of battery hens. People are there in rows of desks answering the phone, and typically, they have a target for the number of calls that they take and how long they spend on each call and things like this. Well, the operation that we had was a 24/7 operation. So therefore it meant that there were 3 shifts a day, and the person in shift A could not leave until their replacement had arrived from shift B. So the issue I had was a member of staff in shift B who was repeatedly late, 10-15 minutes every single day. What this meant was that their colleague in team A was always going to be late leaving. Now, when initially raising it with the individual, they were like, well, what's the big deal? It's only 10 to 15 minutes, and I can make it up at the end of my shift. But of course, that wasn't really the point. It was the impact it was having on their co-worker who was always late leaving. So when I explained to them, yes, 10 to 15 minutes might not sound a lot of time, and you could make it up at the end of the shift. However, the impact on your colleague is that they are now late leaving every day. And as a result, they arrive at their childcare and their childminder late every day. And guess what? They get charged late fees. And then they hit the traffic on the way home so that they then arrive home late. So they're late for supper. And it means that they're late taking their other child to soccer practice. And therefore, when they arrive, the coach isn't happy and the kid's upset because they're late, and the coach isn't happy because they're late every day that they take them to soccer practice. And you could start to see that the person, it dawned on them that the issues that they were creating for their co-worker in this example were far outweighing whether or not it was just 10 to 15 minutes for them, but to their co-worker, that went a lot more. There was also other points that we came out in the conversation that part of this was, well, you're contracted to be here between X time and X time, not 15 minutes either way. But that was the secondary issue. The key thing was about that unlocked it for them and therefore got them to accept, okay, perhaps I do need to be on time, was the impact it was having on their co-worker. And then what I was able to do is to say, okay, so what could you now do to make sure you come in on time? And there were a couple of things that we talked about in terms of them, getting an earlier transit bus than they had, taking a different route, and a couple of other practical things that they could do. We monitored it over the next week, and they had improved. And to be honest, were they going to be the most punctual person going forward? No, it's not a Disney ending. But let's say their lateness now came into 1 or 2 minutes and not 10 to 15 minutes, and therefore the impact on the rest of the team was not as great as it had been before. So hopefully that illustrates for people an example of how you can use the beef model, and in our next video we're going to see Marilyn doing just that.
Thanks, Russell. What I like about your story too is the way that the younger you, your younger self, identified that there were multiple issues at play, but you zeroed in on only one of those issues, and you zeroed in on the one that was going to give the greatest leverage, and you chose to lead with that in talking about what the behavior was that you wanted to see changed, which is another piece that I think we'd like to recommend to everybody. And it ties to something that was said in the chat box when we asked the question, what was Marilyn doing in this first round, was that she was being too vague. She was being specific on the one hand, but she was also being too vague on the other. And I think a lot of what that was about was the fact that she hadn't zeroed in on specifically the behavior that she wanted to tackle. So we'll see here doing things differently in this next scenario, this next piece, next half of the video. We're going to pick up from where we left off. We'll actually rewind about 10 seconds so that you can just remember where we were. As you go through this time, I'd like you to try to just make mental note of when you see Marilyn shifting from each stage of the beef model. And just be aware that she does actually follow the beef model, so she does actually do it. And then the other thing I want to let you know is that when we were working with these actors and recording this video, we actually didn't give them a script. We gave them the scenario, which is essentially no more than what you've seen. And we gave them the beef model. And so a lot of what you're seeing them do, these two actors are both improv actors. And so what they're doing actually is improvising their way through the scenario while they apply the beef model. So they are doing exactly what you can be doing with very little change, very little difference. So here we go with the video. Watch for those 4 stages. Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to add those 4 stages into the chat box so that you can see them while you're watching the video at the same time. And here we go.
That's kind of the point, is that you were supposed to put information on the slides, and as I understand it,
this is what I'm saying.
there were just titles on the slides. There was no actual.
There's enough there to go.
It's
supposed to be the project. He's supposed to know what's going on with the project.
Well, but the bullet points
to
are
go
supposed
with what I gave him. With what I.
There's
Now
supposed
it's
to be
me.
bullet
Maybe
points
you
to
should be
help
looking at. Should you be looking at Edward? Maybe.
Skylar, I'm sitting here speaking with you, so I'd like to just finish this conversation with you. All right?
Great.
Now, ultimately, I understand there's a lot going on, but ultimately, this presentation was your responsibility. You were supposed to get it done, and done to a satisfactory extent, and it didn't happen. All right? And the effect of that on the team is really, really strong. Like, it's not that it just looks bad on Edward, who's giving the presentation, but this was with a client. Like, he was representing all of us. All right? So if Edward doesn't do well presenting your work, that actually reflects back on all of us on the team. And we don't look really great in front of the client right now. And I've also had to do some dancing around and explaining in order to sort of get us back on track. All right? So, it's not just about you and Edward and whatever's happening there. It's about all of us, and we're all in this together. So we've talked a little bit. Sorry. May I go on?
I was just going to say, speaking of that, is there any end to this assignment? You know, like when's what's his face, Stevie? When's Stevie coming back?
Stevie is on a long-term health absence, so I really don't have an end time for that. I know that you were brought in here to cover for him, and I know this is not maybe your ideal situation, and that perhaps.
Yeah, you could say that. It would go a long way to helping with my motivation to know what's going to happen with this. Like, I just feel like I'm stuck in this assignment forever.
I understand that probably feels pretty frustrating. You're not where you want to be. That's another little thing we didn't really talk about, but I know that you have been keeping in touch with your other team. Maybe that might be related to why we're not always getting responses from you in a timely manner. Is there a way that we can?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Tame that a little bit.
Yep. For sure.
All right. See, all of these things that are happening are actually slowing us down. We're not making our deadlines. And so the longer that happens, the longer it's going to take to get you back where you need to be. So if I can just kind of regroup, we've talked a little bit about what's happening with you and the team. We've talked about some of the things, specifically the Zoom meetings, presentations. I know on Basecamp sometimes you're not ticking off assignments and don't seem to be, we're not quite sure when you're present. And then the result of that is we start missing deadlines, we start looking bad in front of the client. It slows things down for all of us. And that also means that you can't get back to where I know that you really want to be, your area of expertise. Once again, we really appreciate having you here because you're great. You're great at what you do, and we know that. So can we just talk a little bit about the future, just getting through the next, again, part of this really challenging time. So what kind of commitment can I get from you to address these things, just so that we can make it easier for you to feel more engaged, feel happier with what you're doing?
The big one is if there's any word on the assignment switches, that's my lifeline.
I totally understand. That must be really frustrating, for sure. So what if I can promise you, like, once a week you can have some time to check in with your other team, and we can just sort of mark that time off, so that we know when we have your attention, and we can give you some time to keep up with what's going on over there.
That'd be great.
If you can sort of come up with a little proposal,
Sure.
how you can do that and still maintain our deadlines.
Yep.
And if you can have that to me by the
I can do
end
that
of,
by the end of, I can do it by today, no problem.
by the end of, perfect, excellent. And then let's check in next week again and see how it's going. All right.
All right.
Thanks again, Skylar. Really
Okay.
appreciate. All right.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. So our next question, or our question for you here at the end of this video is, how did Marilyn do the second time? What did you notice that was effective in her approach? So if you take a few moments to type that into the chat box. How did Marilyn do the second time, and what did you notice that was effective in her approach the second time through?
We're seeing some answers come through into the chat box. Give people another sort of moment to get their thoughts together. Ken, if you have that other question on the slide, that would be great, just in case anyone is just needs to reflect on that while they write.
I wish I could, Russell, but the screen, my screen is frozen because it's busy processing the video. There we go. It's just starting to catch up now. Seems to be chugging through the video as it processes on how to get into these second questions. There we go.
There we go. Excellent, excellent.
All caught up now. So we're seeing a bunch of things in the chat box, Russell. I'm seeing the fact that this time around, she's more focused. I'm definitely seeing that as well, because do keep in mind that the actor, it really is going through this in real life. So in this second approach, they're like, this time I'm going to use the beef model. I've got the structure in front of me, she says to herself as she goes through the conversation. She actually did have that structure in front of her. She didn't try to overtalk Skylar. And in fact, there was a point where she was stepping on something that Skylar was saying, and she actually paused and asked him if there was something he wanted to say, and he did leap in with something which really revealed what was really troubling him. So by asking more questions and making more space, she was finding out more of what we might call the subtext, for instance. She also showed compassion. She showed empathy. She noticed that. She stayed on task. And she'd expected outcomes, but she listened to Skylar and was willing to help him get to a new level. She was much more specific, and also in speaking to the effect of his actions on the overall team performance. But what I also liked about that was that she focused not just on the impact on the team, but also the impact on Skylar himself. Once Skylar revealed that it was important to him to just get away from this assignment that he was working on, Skylar made it clear that, well, you're not helping yourself by what you're doing right now. So we're not going to get you out of this assignment until you get this assignment finished. So she was really focusing not just on the effect on the team, but also the effect on Skylar himself as well. And at the very end, she asked for a commitment from the employee, Tina has mentioned, and she was concerned about, or was specific about what the future next steps would be. So those are some of the things I'm seeing in the chat box, Russell. Was there anything else that you'd like to comment on?
I think there was one thing I noticed, and I think, this idea about her being more specific, more organised, allowing a little bit more space, and allowing Tyler to respond. I think because she had prepared beforehand, even just by using that beef model, and as you said, Ken, both with our actors here, they weren't scripted there. They literally had, I'll make up my own notes based on the scenario and improvised it. So even just in there, in fairly quickly was able to get a structure there, know where she wanted to go with the conversation, and that allowed her to be more confident and, give a little bit more space for him to give his answers, not feeling that she was rushed, and stay to the point because she had it in front of her. And I think that's one of the big takeaways for it, really, is saying the preparation phase, giving some thought to it, just allows you to be more confident when you get in there. And you don't have to do it exactly the same way that Marilyn did. You can bring your own style to it. But it certainly works for her, and it works for many of our other participants that have done this over the years.
Thank you. Thank you, Russell. I'm going to suggest, Russell, that we move, because we've got about 9 minutes left, I'm going to suggest we move into just a review of the overall takeaways. And while we're doing that, we also had a little bit of room set aside at the end for a Q&A. So if there's anyone that has a burning question that you hope that Russell and I can address, please do type it into the chat box while Russell is going through our takeaways. Russell. Yeah. Take away the takeaways.
Or chat it into the type box, whichever way you want to have it.
Yeah, chat it into the type box. Let's do that.
Okay. All right, so first thing, just to sort of recap on some of the key points we've been talking about over the last sort of 50 minutes or so. Remember, you're not doing yourself, your team, or the individual any favours by not dealing with the issue. Just letting it fester is not going to help. So taking that early proactive management action is going to be key. Okay, and you can use the beef model, as we've seen in the example there. The first time around, Marilyn was doing that conversation without the beef model. The second time she was using the beef model, and it worked a lot better the second time than it did the first time. And it will work the same for you. It's just happened with a lot of people over the years have found that. And the final thing is about practice, practice, practice. Now, on our face-to-face workshops, we'll often have one of our live improv artists with us to become that character so that people can practice doing it in real time. But even if you don't have that, the opportunity of taking a trusted co-worker or colleague that you could practice with, just so that you could go over what you wanted to say in the conversation and get them perhaps just to give you some feedback on it or to react perhaps as the individual might react, just gives you an opportunity to get even better at it. Because the last thing you want to do is the first time you have a go at it is for real, when you've got the actual person in the room. So the more that you can practice with someone else, with one of our actors on one of our events, or even just in front of the mirror with yourself, and is going to be to your advantage. So, run it through as a dry run before you go for real. I think we might have one or two questions come into the meeting chat, Ken, so let's take a look at those.
Yes, Marvell has asked, what if Skylar was a partner with a very different work ethics and culture? So what if Skylar was a partner in an organization that had and I'm assuming there's two ways to take this question. One is, what if Skylar had very different work ethics and culture? Or what if Skylar was working in an organization that had different work ethics and culture? I'm going to go with that second way of taking the question, which is like if Skylar was in an organization where he works in an organization where it's a very laid back organization where they don't hold people accountable, then I would suggest that the situation would be even worse. Where if it was an organization where accountability is an issue, then we often see that expression where, one bad apple spoils the barrel is often an expression. You can see that kind of behavior becoming almost contagious, where if one person slacks off, then the other person may feel, well, then why should I work so hard, and so on and so forth. And it can kind of become a bit of a chain reaction. Conversely, if you're in an organization where everyone holds themselves accountable, then it wouldn't be just Marilyn having this conversation. There would be other individuals who would be either wanting to talk to Skylar or modeling good behavior for Skylar. So I think that can often be one of the points.
I think it's one.
Also, there's another question here. Oh, sorry.
So I was just going to add on to your point there, Ken, is that one of the things is about, even before this, about setting clear expectations with people. And even as we increasingly work in a more a diverse group of people, we have people coming from in some organisations I'm working with all over the world with we have 14, 15 different languages spoken, people coming together with different ways of doing things, we can still set expectations of what we want people to be doing and how we want them to be working. So then if people don't do that, and people can be involved in that. I mean, one of other projects that Ken and I work on is Ken's Culture Cards, which helps you define what that culture looks like. So it's not a necessarily just top down, but it's also establishing what the expectations are for people, and then you can hold them to them. And I think Nikki's point in there about being proactive, about the balance with ensuring that if is it the right time. And I think what I would say to that, Nikki, is absolutely, but it's about a conscious decision. Remember when I was saying, do we deal with it or do we live with it? If we decide as the manager, this may not be the best time for me to address this with this individual, and it might be better done next week, then that's absolutely fine, because we've made the conscious decision to do it. If we don't deal with it because this is difficult, therefore I won't deal with it, then that's not a helpful way to approach it. So if it's a conscious decision to postpone it to a more advantageous time, then have at it. It's your decision at the end of the day as the manager.
And Russell, that could your advice there to Nikki could also tie to what Aaron has commented on. Aaron's less of a question, more of a comment, that as somebody who has a need for accommodations, a couple of days notice of a meeting and conversation makes all the difference. So those two things kind of go together, that there might not be the best time, and there might be the person might need some notice in order to be able to have the conversation. And so it's often good to make an appointment in advance. So rather than simply letting it drop, making the appointment in advance can really be helpful. Russell, we're now just 4 minutes away from the end of our webinar. It's time for us to hand the reins back to Mary. Mary, are you standing by?
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. I look forward to future opportunities to work with both of you again. And I know we're working on something for December, and we'll be sharing that with the audience in the coming weeks. And please feel free to get in touch and follow Ken and Russell via their website. We'll be following up also with those details and the recording of this webinar and further resources that Ken and Russell have generously shared. So thanks again for that. Also feel free to check out previous webinars from our series on our website, as well as information about our upcoming events like Nonprofit Connections. On October 18th, we'll be hearing virtually from a panel of leaders in the nonprofit sector about how they've been responding to the Great Resignation, how they've been building engagement and an inclusive, diverse, and equitable culture from a systems lens. And panelists will discuss the impacts they've been facing, innovative approaches and learnings, and shifts in how they're thinking about the future of work and sustainability in their organization. As well as November 9th, we'll be hosting an in-person gathering at the Calgary Public Library's Performance Hall, where we'll be releasing our upcoming report on impacts in the sector. So I want to thank again our supporters, the Muttart Foundation, the Calgary Foundation, the Suncor Energy Foundation, and the Government of Alberta, to the CCVO team who supported this webinar, and to you, the audience, for joining us. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.